Hi, I'm Dr. Kathryn Henderson, the Director of School and Community Initiatives at the Rudd Center for Food Policy and Obesity, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about the childcare research we have been doing recently. I want to start by taking a moment to explain why we focus so many resources on studying childcare and trying to improve the environment there. Young children can consume up to 2/3 of their daily intake in the childcare setting, and the vast majority of U.S. young children do spend a significant portion of time in care outside of their home. There is very convincing evidence that health habits are formed early, so this is the time when we want to be teaching children to eat well, to be active. There's also a natural fit in childcare for focusing on the whole child. When we move into the school setting, we find a big focus on academic outcomes. But childcare just naturally embraces health of children, well-being, socialization, and so it's an easy sell to have them thinking about health and well-being of children. Childcare centers and family homes are heavily regulated through state and local regulations. So there are lots of avenues through which we can raise the standards for policy and raise practices. And finally, parents of young children, birth through 5, are really hungry for information on how to set their children up for a lifetime of good health. And so these are really teachable moments. They also really heavily rely on the relationships with their care providers. So this is an opportunity to really use that relationship between family, parent, child care provider to provide good information to parents and have those good practices continue at home as well. Childcare has a variety of ways in which it can exert an influence on the dietary intake of children. First of all, many child care centers and homes provide, at the very least, snacks and often meals. So they select the foods and beverages that are served, and in this way really influence daily intake. They influence the spacing of meals and how those look like, so they set children up to have very regular meal and snack habits, which is a positive thing. They set the tone for the mealtime environment, so they teach children to sit at the table, to use good manners. They teach children how to portion their food and heavily influence how children really interact and whether they have a positive experience at meal and snack times. They can also provide nutrition education, probably not in the didactic way that we think of regular kind of education, but they do a ton of interactive activities. They cook with children, they garden with children, and really can be their first opportunity to encounter nutrition education, have a positive experience of that. And finally, as I said before, parents rely heavily on their care providers for advice, and they can offer advice on food that is brought in from home and food that children will eat from home as well, so they exert an influence in that way. I want to introduce you to the Child and Adult Care Food Program. This is a national program through the United States Department of Agriculture. It's administered and regulated at that level and then administered locally through states. It feeds 3.3 million children daily. So this program is feeding a lot of U.S. children. And it's fairly comparable to the National School Lunch Program. So it provides reimbursement based on a child's eligibility for free, reduced price, or paid meals. So it's kind of like school lunch for childcare. We spend a lot of our time studying this program because it influences so many children, has impact on so many children's eating habits, but also because it really targets children from low-income families, and they are of particular interest to us. We did some research several years ago on how the CACFP program looked in childcare. What was being served? What did children eat? Did they eat what was being served? And I want to show you this slide so you can get a look at the distribution of food on a child's plate in this program. If you have a look, let me orient you to the bars here. The blue bars represent what was eaten, and the red top-up represents what was served. And we have identified food by category. So if you have a look here, you can see that children are served and consuming a lot of grains, a fair amount of meat, or what we call meat alternates, so things like nut butters, eggs, those kinds of things, and under-consuming fruits and vegetables by a large margin. So you can see this picture lays it out really, really clearly that one of our big targets is going to be increasing fruits and vegetables in childcare and in children generally. This kind of consumption pattern really reflects the U.S. diet for young children and for people overall. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about some of the interventions that we have done to try to change the portion picture and change the distribution of what children are eating in childcare and at home. We focused, as I said, pretty heavily on increasing vegetable consumption. A couple of studies that we carried out in the last year or so include one where we paired vegetables with a familiar liked food. You can see in this picture that we have broccoli on pizza, which is a favorite child food. And we also looked at increasing the visual appeal of foods. So in this case, you can see an illustration here of making caterpillars out of cucumbers and olives and chives for the eyes. And we looked to see whether these interventions would increase vegetable intake and also increase willingness to try new vegetables for children in the childcare setting. I'm going to show you this first result slide here shows willingness to try. And this is the pairing intervention where we had broccoli on pizza. And we did find that most of our children were actually willing to try the broccoli in whatever form it came. So you can see we had on the left bar here, 80% of our kids, even in the control condition, were willing to try the broccoli. But we increased that to about 95% when we put the broccoli on the pizza. So we did find that this intervention was successful in increasing willingness to try, which is a big target for vegetable interventions. We have a hard time with kids sometimes just doing that initial taste. This slide, I'm going to have you focus in on the bars that are circled here. This shows overall how much of all these different food components children ate in our different interventions. The blue bars represent interventions that happen at lunch, and the red bars represent the intervention that happened at snack time. But focus on the circled set of bars here, which shows vegetable consumption at lunch in the blue bars and at snack time in the red bars. And the point I want to make here is that you can see children consume significantly more vegetables at snack time. And that, in part, we hypothesize is because there were no competing foods. So I highlight this to demonstrate that snack is often a missed opportunity. We'll often bring out the cheese crackers or the crackers and the juice. And vegetables on their own, when they're not competing with some of the yummier foods that kids prefer, will be eaten at snack time. So this is a message we're trying to get out there right now. This slide, actually, I'm going to give you a little bit of background here. We tried a vegetable exposure intervention. Many of you will have heard the lore that it can take up to 10 tastes for children to start to prefer a new food. We were interested in seeing if we could demonstrate this, the success of this kind of exposure intervention with vegetables, which are often hard to sell, and also in the childcare setting. So while we often see this exposure intervention working well one-on-one in the lab, we were interested in whether it could really be marketed as a large site intervention. And I show you this slide. Let me orient you here. We did this intervention using cauliflower, snow peas, and peppers. And this is one child's sample over the 10 exposures. The takeaway message here is this child was all over the place. On some days, ate everything. On some days, ate nothing of each of the vegetables. And this child was actually quite typical of the many children that participated in this intervention. The takeaway here is that one day's intake did not predict another day's intake. So really keep trying. Here is the message that a child not eating on one day does not mean he's not going to try some of these foods you're trying to have him or her taste on the next day. So as you can see, a couple other findings from the study, most children did actually try all of the vegetables at some point, as you saw with our broccoli intervention as well on the pizza. Interestingly, consumption of vegetables was predicted by the average consumption at the table the child was sitting at. So we started to look, we detected a bit of a peer influence effect. So sitting children with good eaters or distributing good eaters throughout the tables might be one way to increase vegetable consumption in children. I'm going to come back to talking about the Child and Adult Care Food Program. Right now we are awaiting new regulations for what is served in those programs. And we have been carrying out a series of studies in the last year or so to look at some proposed regulations. These were proposed, or some proposed updates to the regulations. These were proposed by the Institute of Medicine a few years back. We wanted to look at whether what they are proposing actually impacted what children ate. They are proposing increasing variety of fruits and vegetables and increasing amount of fruits and vegetables. So we did that intervention. We looked at what they were proposing, and we presented, the typical meal as it is before any regulations changed and what they would propose to be different. You can see on the left-hand side here, control lunch is what a typical meal looked like pre any change in regulations. can see what children ate was a lot of beverage and a lot of chicken. So meat or meat alternate and a lot of bread and not very much. You can see in the purple and orange slices here, that's what children ate in terms of fruits and vegetables. And what I want to draw your attention to is looking at the right pie chart here. This is what was the lunch as recommended in the new guidelines proposed by Institute of Medicine. And you can see first off that fruit and vegetable consumption increased a lot. This was perhaps in part due to adding a vegetable, so greater variety seemed to increase consumption. And fruit and vegetable consumption increased a lot, which made the distribution of the plate a little bit different. So children were eating smaller amounts of maybe the beverages and the proteins, still enough, but eating a lot more fruits and vegetables. So it was great to see that what are maybe proposed in new regulations may have a really positive impact on what children are eating. In closing, I just want to put in a plug there for policy changes in childcare, looking like, at least from our research and others, they can have a very positive impact on what children are eating in this childcare setting, because that can constitute the majority of what many children eat over the course of the day. This can have a real strong impact on health. Thank you very much.